Welcome. I'm Dr. Douglas Wingate, Integrative Neurorehabilitation Specialist. This video addresses one of the most important and most underserved applications of Neurogen brain balancing, the developing brain. Children and adolescents with neurological and developmental challenges are often those who need the most help and have access to the least. The approaches that exist frequently require sustained cooperation, prolonged engagement, or medications whose long-term impact on the developing brain is still being studied. Neurogen is different. It's passive, gentle, and precisely suited to the brain states that characterize pediatric dysregulation. Before we talk about conditions or interventions, I want to establish something fundamental. The pediatric brain is not simply a smaller adult brain. The developing brain follows its own EEG trajectory of maturing. In infancy, the brain is dominated by slow delta waves. The thalamocortical circuits are still forming, and the entire architecture of the brain is still in its earliest stages. As a child moves into early childhood, roughly ages 2 to 6, theta becomes the dominant rhythm. Neuroplasticity during this period is extraordinarily high, and alpha waves begin to emerge. The critical transition happens in middle childhood, around ages 6 to 9. The dominant posterior oscillations shift from theta to alpha. This is a defining moment in neurological development. The shift from the slow wave rhythms of early childhood toward the faster, more regulated oscillatory patterns that support learning, attention, and emotional regulation. In adolescence, alpha, beta, and gamma progressively strengthen. Slow waves decline, executive networks consolidate in the prefrontal cortex. This is what's considered normal development, and here's why it matters clinically. When any neurological condition, injury, or dysregulation disrupts this trajectory, when slow wave activity persists pathologically, when the maturational shift from theta to alpha is delayed or derailed, the clinical effects are measurable and profound. Understanding this is the foundation for understanding what Neurogen does for pediatric populations. Neurogen brain balancing is suited for a broad range of pediatric neurological and developmental presentations, and I want to name them specifically because each one has a measurable EEG signature that the research has substantiated. ADHD is perhaps the most thoroughly studied. The excess frontal theta and an elevated theta to beta ratio seen in ADHD are among the most replicated EEG biomarkers in all of pediatric neuroscience. This is not a behavioral or a motivational problem, it's a measurable brainwave pattern, and Neurogen is able to directly target it. Individuals on the autism spectrum present with altered theta and alpha power, atypical gamma coherence, and sensory processing dysregulation, all reflecting disordered cortical network development. Sensory processing disorder involves disrupted sensory gating, cortical hyperexcitability, and poor inhibitory rhythm generation, which produce the sensory overwhelm and the dysregulation that define daily life for these children. Pediatric anxiety shows elevated resting high beta and reduced alpha inhibition, the same cortical hyperarousal signatures that are seen in adult anxiety, but with compounding developmental consequences in a brain still building its regulatory architecture. Post-concussion and traumatic brain injury in children produce pathological slow-wave invasion in the injured areas, the same delta and theta burden that's seen in adult traumatic brain injury, but superimposed on a still developing neural architecture that makes recovery both more urgent and more opportunity-rich. Pediatric migraine, we see cortical hyperexcitability, thalamocortical dysrhythmia, and autonomic nervous system dysregulation. This is increasingly prevalent in children, dramatically undertreated, and highly responsive to oscillatory regulation. Learning differences show slower alpha and theta activity compared to age-matched peers, a maturational lag the research has now clearly characterized. In complex neurological presentations, cerebral palsy, post-encephalitic syndromes, developmental delays benefit from a passive, gentle, non-demanding adjunctive approach that doesn't require cooperation or compliance. I want to go deeper on the brainwave picture because this is where the clinical rationale becomes more precise. The excess theta and theta to beta ratio elevation that's seen in ADHD is the hallmark of a brain producing slow wave idle activity when it should be generating faster, focused rhythms. This directly relates to inattention, impulsivity, and executive dysfunction. This is an electrical pattern that we're able to measure and target. Reduced or slowed peak alpha frequency in children with learning disabilities reflects a maturational delay with direct cognitive consequences. These children aren't behind because they haven't tried. Their brains are oscillating at a slower frequency than an age-matched peer, and that has measurable effects on processing speed, attention, and learning. Atypical gamma coherence in those on the autism spectrum reflects impaired long-range network communication, disrupted high-frequency synchronization that underlies the social cognition and sensory integration difficulties that define the condition. Cortical hyperexcitability, seen across pediatric anxiety, migraine, and sensory processing disorder, means the threshold for triggering responses is too low. The brain is not broken, it is over-responsive, and that over-responsiveness is driven by a specific oscillatory failure of inhibitory regulation. Pathological slow-wave invasion in post-concussion and traumatic brain injury produces delta and theta overdrive superimposed on a still maturing brain, compounding the recovery challenge at precisely the developmental moment when the brain is most vulnerable. In disrupted sleep, reduced slow waves, fragmented spindles, poor sleep quality is a measurable correlate to daytime dysregulation and learning difficulty that crosses virtually every pediatric neurological presentation. And these patterns are not simply the way a child is. They're neurological states that reflect disrupted pathways of maturing, and they can be supported. Neurogen's passive protocol is not simply a convenience in pediatric care. It's a clinical differentiator. First, there's no cooperation that's required. Children don't need to watch a screen, perform any tasks, or sustain any attention. They can simply come in, sit down, rest, or even sleep. For a severely dysregulated child with ADHD, for a child on the autism spectrum who can't tolerate sensory demands, for a child who's had a concussion, who is cognitively exhausted, active protocols create an impossible compliance burden. Neurogen removes that burden. Second, we are working with the brain at peak plasticity. The developing brain is more responsive to brainwave guidance than the adult brain, and the research is clear on that. The window of opportunity to support and normalize a neurological trajectory is greatest in childhood. Every year that passes without addressing the underlying brainwave dysregulation is a year of compounding impact on learning, relationships, emotional development, and self-concept. Third, the signal intensity is among the lowest in all neuromodulation. Neurogen's peak output of about 2.5 picowatts is orders of magnitude below any threshold of concern, appropriate for even the youngest children and reassuring for the parents and providers who carry responsibility for these children's well-being. Fourth, there are no medication conflicts. Drug-free and fully adjunctive, Neurogen integrates alongside any existing medication regimen, behavioral therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, or school-based supports without any pharmacological interaction. Let's directly map the EEG evidence to the intervention. Excess theta and elevated theta to beta ratio in ADHD is addressed by EEG-guided stimulation targeting slow wave overdrive, supporting normalization of the theta-beta ratio that research associates with improved attention and impulse regulation. Lag in alpha development is supported by protocols that promote age-appropriate alpha emergence, encouraging the developmental trajectory toward faster, more regulated brainwave states that the brain should be reaching. Sensory cortex hyperexcitability is addressed through the promotion of inhibitory rhythm restoration. So by raising the sensory threshold and reducing the overwhelm that makes ordinary environments unbearable for children with sensory processing difficulties. Atypical gamma coherence in networks of those on the autism spectrum are supported through global network regulation and brainwave balancing, addressing the distributed connectivity disruption that underlies these presentations. And dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, which underlies virtually every pediatric neurological condition in the form of a fight or flight overactivation, is addressed through vagal modulation promoting parasympathetic regulation, reducing the reactivity that drives meltdowns, sleep disruption, and chronic anxiety. For any pediatric intervention, the first question every parent asks is it safe? The answer with Neurogen is among the clearest in all of neuromodulation therapies. It is non-invasive. EEG centers rest gently on the scalp. There are no needles, no surgery, no radiation, no medical procedures. The ultra-low signal output, about 2.5 picowatts, is orders of magnitude below other neuromodulation intensities that have been studied in pediatric populations. The developing brain receives less signal than a household LED light. There's no heating, no tissue effect, nothing that creates a mechanism of concern. It's not about intensity here, it's about specificity. There are no known drug interactions. Neurogen can be used alongside any existing medication regimen, stimulants, SSRIs, anti-epileptics, atypical antipsychotics, without pharmacological interaction or contraindication. And the growing evidence base for transcranial electrical stimulation in pediatric populations is reassuring. A 2025 pilot study in children aged 6 to 19 with childhood onset stroke found no adverse effects. And maybe most importantly for families, the session experience itself is restful. Children can rest, listen to soft music, or even fall asleep. There's no performance anxiety, no compliance challenge, no frustrating screens. Many children find sessions calming, an experience that itself is therapeutic for chronically dysregulated nervous systems. Research confirms that the developing brain's elevated neuroplasticity creates a greater window of working with the nervous system than adult brains, making early intervention with passive neuromodulation not just appropriate, but especially compelling. For providers making referral decisions and for families assessing fit, here's a practical guide. Strong candidates span the full range of pediatric neurological and developmental presentations. ADHD at any severity, children on the autism spectrum and sensory processing difficulties, pediatric anxiety, emotional dysregulation and school refusal, post-concussion syndrome in children and young athletes, learning differences, pediatric migraine including treatment-resistant cases, complex neurological presentations including cerebral palsy, post-encephalitic syndromes, and developmental delays, and families who are specifically seeking a drug-free or adjunctive approach that works alongside their existing treatment plan. The contraindications are narrow. Active seizure disorder requires medical consultation prior to initiating. That's a standard precaution for any form of neuromodulation. Implanted electrical devices like a cochlear implant or a vagal nerve stimulator require individual review. Open wounds or active scalp infection at electrode sites need to resolve first. Parental consent and involvement in sessions is required and expected. Two important clarifications. Neurogen is not a substitute for neurological evaluation, applied behavior analysis, or school-based educational supports. It is a powerful complement to all of those, though, and it integrates well with occupational therapy, speech therapy, behavioral therapy, and medical management, designed to work alongside the full care team rather than to replace any part of it. Every child deserves a chance to reach their full potential. The developing brain is extraordinarily capable of change. The trajectory of the maturing brain that neurological conditions disrupt are not fixed states. They are dynamic brainwave patterns that can be supported, guided, and in many cases normalized when the right intervention is applied at the right time. Neurogen brain balancing offers children a safe, gentle, evidence-informed path toward neurological balance that learning, growth, and genuine connection require. For more information about our integrative neurorehabilitation practice and to schedule a consultation, visit acuneuromodulation.com. Thank you for your time. We are here to help.